Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. Today, I'm really nervous about this episode. One, because I'm attempting to do it live as a video on my Instagram. And if the tech all works, you'll get to see it. I'll try and link to it. And two, because I just had this fear like I might get canceled. But at the same time, I know that I need to share what's been happening and I need to speak up. It's just like who I am. Okay, to me, this is yoga. So if the yoga and health and wellness world wants to kick me out of the club for speaking up for peace and freedom for all people, then I don't really want to be in the club anymore. And if you're new here, it's amazing to connect. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and this podcast is being recorded on the land of the Anishinaabe, Odawa, and Mississauga people. I'm continuing to learn about the culture of the Anishinaabe people while also learning about my settler ancestors who came here generations ago. I'm a Canadian yoga teacher, mom of 3, entrepreneur, and forever student who loves to ask questions, and sometimes really tough questions. That's why I'm super grateful to be able to podcast, because I get to ask questions about yoga. And when I say yoga, I mean like really, what is yoga and the philosophy of yoga? And I get to connect with amazing people. So I'm really grateful that you're here today and that I can connect with you and so that we can learn together. A yoga teacher messaged me this week in response to a question that I posted on my Instagram stories, and it took me a full week to really process things. Or maybe it felt like a week. It might have only been a few days, thanks to his comment. And I really mean thank you for this comment. I'm super grateful. That's not sarcasm, which I can be known for. My original question that I had posted on Instagram was about how yoga teachers and students are feeling right now when yoga studios and teachers are being silent about the harm that's happening to Palestinians, mostly children. Many yoga students and teachers answered to say that they were feeling afraid, angry, confused, hurt, and some said that they were taking note of who wasn't speaking up. All of these answers made sense to me because I was feeling the same way. And then I got this message that made me feel so many emotions all at once. And I'm sharing this part of this message with permission as well, not naming names. Actually, this yoga teacher said that I could use his first name, but for my story, we're going to call him Jim. And that's not his real name, in case you're wondering. So Jim wrote to me you know how that little bubble on Instagram is so small and you can only fit so many words in there. So Jim wrote in there, I teach yoga, not geopolitics. I hope to use my voice to amplify compassion, not conflict. Now, if I didn't already know Jim from his Instagram account, but also because we've had connections over the years in various discussions, then I might not have responded in the same way if it was just that. And I thought for a moment, maybe I'll just post his comment like I was with all of the other comments. But I knew that the people who are still following my Instagram stories, who are all in for speaking up right now, I knew that if I posted it, I knew that there would probably be some type of reaction, and it would probably be in my DMs. And then I thought, then I guess I'll share those reactions and like those comments anonymously and with permission, of course. But I started to feel like Jim might get attacked for this. And I was also feeling on edge about it, like something was really not feeling settled in me about it. So I've learned over the years, and by making many mistakes, that this is when I need to pause and reflect. So Jim reached out and clarified a little bit more in the DMs shortly after that, letting me know that he's feeling heartbroken for the people trapped in this conflict of Israel and Palestine right now. He talked about how his Jewish friends are in deep agony and fear with the rise of anti-Semitism, and he spoke about how afraid they feel right now to be Jewish. And I've had many conversations with friends that sound a lot like this as well. And then he wrote about how also Islamophobia is on the rise and how it's reminding him of after 9/11. And I was agreeing with him on all of these things. He then went on to share that he has a friend who's actually being exiled right now in a different country. And then he mentioned the conflict in Sudan. And then he left me with a really good question, which I've been hearing so much of this similar question in many spaces, not just yoga spaces. He left me with this question. He said, why does that not deserve our action, our compassion, our urgency? And I was thinking, like, maybe I'll come back to this and just like, but then I thought, no, I need to answer this question right now. Like, how do we address all of the suffering in the world? And this is something that has been affecting me for a long time in my own life, because I have a parent who told me all my life growing up, Shannon, you cannot save the world. And it was always said in a way that bothered me because I care deeply about a lot of things. But the thing that has given me comfort over the years is when I first heard the starfish story. Does anybody here know the starfish story? I actually looked up, like I like to know who wrote the starfish story, and you can look up the original if you Google star thrower. But here's the condensed version that I heard a long time ago, and a shout out of thanks to the Starfish Foundation because it's on their website. I'll link to it in the show notes. So a young girl was walking along the beach, and there were thousands of starfish that had been washed up because there was a really big storm. And when she came to each starfish, she'd pick it up and throw it back into the ocean, and people were really watching with amusement. And she'd been doing this for some time when a man approached and he said, little girl, why are you doing this? Look at this beach. You cannot save all of these starfish. You can't begin to make a difference. And the girl seemed absolutely crushed. But after a few moments, she bent down, picked up another starfish, and hurled it as far as she could into the ocean. Then she looked up at the man and she replied, well, I made a difference to that one. And I love this story so much. In that moment, the old man looked at the girl inquisitively and thought about what she'd done and what she'd said. And then he was inspired and he started helping her, throwing starfish back into the sea. And soon others joined in and all the starfish were saved after the storm. So in summary, there's a lot that we could focus on in the world. And right now, what's happening to Palestinian people in Gaza and around the world is being focused on for a reason. So all kinds of human rights organizations, journalists who've covered other areas and other genocides and other conflicts, and leaders, people from around the world. Jewish Voices for Peace is a great organization to follow. They're calling attention to this because it is at a whole other level. That's why it's getting the attention that it's getting. And we can do this faster together. We can do way more together. So we can all demand a ceasefire now, one that goes beyond this 4-day pause. I had someone tell me today, there is a ceasefire right now. And we do know that there's also a plan after this 4-day pause for things to continue for 2 months. The Israeli government has made that clear. I'm hoping that that gets canceled. But at this point right now, there's 2 more months at this pace. So we can together, collectively, we can deal with this right now together, and then we can turn to the next thing that needs our attention together. And we're going to do amazing things when we decide that's the way we're doing it. Okay, so let's get back to Jim's message, because there was a lot for me to unpack in that short message that he had written to me. He went on to explain that he feels like his role is to expand their own awareness and hopefully their compassion. I totally get that. I totally agree. He said compassion is the antidote to violence. He closed his note by saying he appreciated my heart and my voice. I thought, what a great conversation that we had. And still, this brewed inside me for days. Like I couldn't shake this, I didn't even know. It was just like an uncomfortable feeling. Before I finally felt like this post today was something that was going to help me to form my answer back to Jim. So there were a lot of other messages that have happened, conversations, information I've been taking in. But today, Dr. Sham shout out to Dr. Sham, who we had on the podcast back in episode 269, where we talked about yoga and colonialism. He shared this post today, and I'll link to it in our show notes, or you can go search yoga philosophy and you'll find Dr. Sham. In his post today, he asked, because he's really into philosophy and he's very much into yoga philosophy, and so he asked, what ethical theory would justify cutting off food, water, fuel, and bombing trapped people to the order of 12,000 and counting in response to the killing of 1,200 and the abduction of 240? So this post, compiled with all of the other things that were kind of swimming around in my brain, made me feel like, okay, now I'm going to reach back out to Jim. And I shared that post and I said to Jim, I haven't posted your comment because I feel like I'm doing a lot of processing on it, which is really great, by the way. And it's also uncomfortable. I've been thinking of scope of practice and staying in our lane and niche work, which I think goes along with what you were saying. That's what I said to Jim. And I've been thinking about the philosophy of yoga, non-harming, and speaking up when I see harm. Thought I'd share this today as I think it's relevant. So then I shared it, and Jim replied really fast and thanked me for sharing it and said, yes, scope of practice, what's in my lane, and what can I effectively communicate gives me sort of the boundaries that help me to decide what to include in a class. And he went on to say, ahimsa is absolutely relevant here, and exposing harm done in the darkness is good and necessary. By the way, I'm in agreement with Dr. Sham. I cannot fathom opposing ceasefire. Madness. And right in that moment, well, first of all, let me back it up. I know just from Jim's earlier reply that he really cares about what's happening in the world, because there isn't just one genocide happening right now, or one war, or one conflict. And there's a lot going on in our own countries and our own communities. There's a lot that we can be doing right now to help the suffering of others. And in that moment, I had this burst of hope and excitement. And I was like, we're doing a podcast on this. I think I'm going to try and do it live. Here we are. So Jim, of course, was on the same page, and I wasn't surprised by that. I know him really well. I thought he would be. And when he said, I don't know anyone who wouldn't be wanting a ceasefire right now, that was the light bulb moment, because I mainly have people telling me that they're so grateful for what I've been sharing on Instagram, especially the people who can't share because they don't feel safe to do so. They thank me for speaking up and for asking for a ceasefire and for the resources I've been sharing, like how we can contact our local reps, how we can do all kinds of things, go to protests, dates for protests, all the things. But what Jim wasn't seeing or experiencing is what's been happening to me and to others who are speaking up for peace right now and calling for a ceasefire. So this is kind of personal information, but I think it's really important for me to share it with you. A few people have threatened me. One yoga teacher with quite a large Instagram platform threatened to cancel me. She called me anti-Semitic for speaking up for a ceasefire. She left me a very rude and lengthy voice message full of hate for me and the people that live in Gaza right now, and she canceled a collaboration that we actually had planned. And I was actually pretty relieved that she canceled the collaboration, because after getting her voice message, I thought, I don't want to work with someone who had it literally said to me, no one wants. And this is a trigger warning if you have people like Palestinian families. She said, no one wants the people who live in Gaza. It was horrible to hear language like that about millions of people. I even had one person call me a Nazi. So the people who are speaking out right now, I see some of you here in the live that we're doing, because you're getting these messages. And lots of times it's just like, okay, block, move on. Like, I'm not dealing with this. So I actually do know people are standing on the side of more death to innocent Palestinians. It's shocking. Some have tried to explain why they think the people, even the children, don't deserve to live. And it's been horrible to listen to, and I've blocked anyone who's spewing incredible hate and racism. I can't have conversations at this point with that. And we're also hearing similar statements from the Israeli government. People who are running the show there right now are trying to dehumanize the people of Gaza and justify the war crimes that they've committed before and after October the 7th. This didn't just start. So, yeah, you might assume that everyone wants peace and a ceasefire, but there are a few people who don't. And when people say nothing, they start to get lumped into that group. So let's get back to the boost of hope and excitement that I felt today in this message. I was reminded that most people want the bombing to end. They know that the safety of Jewish, Israeli, Muslim, Palestinian, and really all of us, all people, all of our safety is intertwined. So more violence is never the answer. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I wanted to say to Jim and really to all yoga teachers. First, I wanted to share that there are many yoga students who are confused right now because in their class, their teachers are talking about ahimsa, which is non-harming, and how that's for us, but also for others. And then yoga teachers on social media might be saying nothing or in their emails. So the question is, how do we stick to our niche? Because I'm really all about niching down and specializing. So definitely, I think that's important. How do we stay in our lane and teach within our scope of practice? All things I'm super passionate about. That's why Jim's question had me really pondering and feeling uncomfortable for days. He's really right in this part. If you are a yoga teacher who specializes in sleep, you aren't going to use your class time to give a lecture on the history of Israel. That's not what people are signing up for. It wouldn't be within your scope of practice. Well, more so, it's not what you do. You're not a historian. Like, go do that somewhere else. But you might address some issues students are having when they're glued to their phones and scrolling. I've been doing that a little bit lately. Hoping and praying and being consumed and upset by what's happening. It might affect people's sleep. Hands up if you've had your sleep affected in the last month by what's happening in the world. And also, how can we practice yoga, which hopefully we all agree on includes ahimsa. This is this non-harming, for those of you who don't know what ahimsa is. This is in our scope of practice for sure. And part of that is speaking up when we see harm. So it's not just about being kind to us and the people who are directly in the yoga class around us. It is like, I see harm. So I'm going to give an example, and it is a huge exaggeration. And I had a bit of a laugh today as I was like thinking of some analogy. So imagine you went to a yoga class at a studio, and on the way in, there's a yoga student who's fallen and hurt themselves, and no one's helping them. You notice that they're bleeding and they can't get up, and the teacher just kind of ushers you into the class and says, okay, it's time to start. And that teacher is focusing on compassion during the Dharma talk. And it's hard to focus because the person in the waiting room is like crying in pain and moaning and asking for help. All of us would likely go out and help that student. And this seems ridiculous because what yoga teacher would ever do that? And probably if there was a yoga teacher doing that in a yoga studio, you would skip the class and you'd be like, I'm out of here. I'm not returning to the studio. And even though the yoga teacher isn't a paramedic, it's out of their scope of practice to like start practicing medicine on this person. It's up to them to help in the moment. And we're in that moment right now. And yes, it might feel very different, but I want to ask you, is it? Is it really different? Yoga is all about union and connection. In my world, if it's about something else, let me know. Some people get confused. They think maybe it's about like stretching, fitness. There are over 2 million people in Gaza right now asking for help. 4 out of 5 people are without a home right now. They've been displaced, and some yoga teachers are explaining to me, mostly in my private messages, why they deserve this. And some yoga teachers are going forward like it's not even happening. They're the yoga teacher who's like, we're just running the class even though this person has fallen and needs medical attention. And I know that's not what the majority of yoga teachers are doing. I know that's not what Jim is doing. I know that he cares for and wants a ceasefire. He messaged that to me. That's why I know that. Is he posting it anywhere else? Is he sharing it in his emails? I don't think so. I also know that students going to yoga right now with very frazzled nervous systems, just needing like movement, breath, meditation, maybe not meditation, or like the philosophy of yoga and the connection of the teacher and the relationship to the students and the limbs of yoga. Students need this right now to help them to like ground, recharge, keep going. And some of our yoga students have so much going on in their lives that they actually can't even look at world events right now. And so they're counting on the rest of humanity to do that for them right now. They can't do it. They can't handle it. I'm sure all of you know someone who's like struggling with something in their life where they're like, I cannot watch the news. There are some yoga teachers like that right now as well. And I would be asking, like, if we're at this place, are we in a place where we can hold space? That's kind of a tough question. Your students, your yoga students, can feel it when you create a class and you understand the complex suffering around you. They know when you're holding space for them as well as for what's happening in the world. Your practice is the fuel for this. So you feel all the things and you do your own practice at home and you know in that moment what's helping you. And just walking into a class and leading a class with that intention is enough in a yoga class. On the flip side, so think of a time when you were the yoga student and something felt really off, like the yoga teacher was not actually connected to like what's going on around them, maybe in the world, maybe in the room at the time. It's kind of like that read the room, like see what's going on. Your students can pick up when you are like doing that subtle spiritual bypassing. I'm not pointing any fingers at anyone who's here, but like, do you know what that feels like as a yoga student there? Like the yoga teacher who's saying like, good vibes only talk positive to me. We wouldn't say that if someone came up to us and they said like, I'm really sad, like I just lost a family member or a pet. We wouldn't be like, good vibes only. That would not be reading the room. And our students can feel that. Also, this can happen when yoga teachers say, you know what, just don't watch the news. I just don't watch the news. That's not going to work for everyone. If a yoga student is saying, I'm finding it really helpful to take a break from the news right now, fine. But if we're telling people, just don't watch what's happening in the world, I think we got to dig into that a little bit. So here's another scenario. Imagine that one of your yoga students comes into class and they're Palestinian, and you don't know that, which is very likely considering that over 700,000 people were forced to leave their homes in the 1948 Nakba. And then in 2021, there was a population figure that worldwide there's 13.8 million Palestinians. So imagine this person with Palestinian roots and family who's either in the West Bank or in Gaza or somewhere. Imagine that they're now in your class and they're reading your emails. Maybe they're following you on social media. Does that change how you're then teaching your class? Maybe not, maybe not at all. But might it change how you share something on social media or what you write in your email? I think it might. And imagine that the student after class comes up to you and they share that they love the class. They say that it's exactly what they needed. And then they share with you that they've been worried sick about their family and friends in Gaza right now. And they ask if you'd like to sign a petition for a ceasefire. Would you decline in that moment and tell them it's out of your scope of practice? Or even worse yet, what if there was a yoga teacher who told that person in that moment, you know what, your friends and family deserve this? Because that's the messages that I'm getting when I'm saying, let's call for a ceasefire. This makes me really mad. Just so you all know, I'm going to take a breather here. It makes me really upset to think that someone would get that reaction from a yoga teacher because of actions that were because of a terrorist group. This is the part that I hesitate on. I'm like, do I edit this out? There's so much. Anyway, we're going to leave it. So would you like to be affiliated with that yoga teacher? I don't want to be. And this is why I actually think that Yoga Alliance should get on board with this really soon. That yoga teachers out there are spewing hate and racism and calls for more bombs. And to me, that's not yoga. What's happening right now is that anyone who's not calling for a ceasefire is being counted as not wanting a ceasefire. And let me explain why that is, because you might be thinking, no, I want a ceasefire. I'm just not sharing it on social media. Because there are some people who aren't doing that, but they're also not calling for it anywhere. So I met with my local MP. Shout out to Alex Ruff. I don't think he listens to the podcast. And he told me this isn't really an issue that his constituents are worried about. And I think he just doesn't know, because so many people are thinking, like Jim earlier, who wrote the message to me, people are just thinking everyone wants a ceasefire. There's no point contacting my local representative, because that's what I want. Don't we all want that? Don't we all want peace? I do want to share also that I was feeling such rage this week, and underneath that was deep disappointment in our leaders and all of us as a collective human community. Because I had this idea that if we all stood together shouting ceasefire, it would happen. And when I first started asking for a ceasefire, I had people tell me this is a really complex issue. You need to learn all the history. And I had actually been learning about Palestine for about 3 years because I saw Tristan Katz post something, and I knew that Tristan was a yoga teacher aligned with my own values. I'd learned from Tristan before, especially with social justice and speaking up against systems of oppression. We've had Tristan on the podcast. Huge thank you to Tristan. I didn't really act on anything at the time. I was just started learning 3 years ago. Make sure to go follow Tristan, by the way. They're amazing. Go follow him. I'll make sure to link to their Instagram in the show notes. It's Tristan Katz. So I had 3 years of looking into Palestine, and then people were telling me, like, that's not enough. And I doubted myself. I was like, well, that's just my nature. I go inward, and I'm just like, I'm going to learn, and I'm just going to take in all the information, probably to an unhealthy amount. So I did that. I went and I learned more, and then I shared more. I was like, yeah, my stance is the same. I want a ceasefire. I shared that, and I waited for the yoga teachers and wellness influencers, entrepreneurs and coaches who follow me on Instagram to all rise up together, because now we know, because they care about ahimsa, non-harming, and they talk about wellness and health and supporting small businesses, which is anti-capitalism, which I'm all for. And just the news alone from any source, no matter which way it was leaning, was counting the children per day that are dying in Gaza right now. And as I record this, it's close to 200 per day. So I thought this is a no-brainer. Yoga teachers who are all for peace are going to speak up. I even had this vision, because I'm super optimistic, maybe it's a bad trait, that if everyone in the world would go on strike until there's peace, imagine how quickly we could have things wrapped up without even the leaders who are making the decisions with ties to money on their brain and all kinds of other things. But that wasn't happening. So many people were not speaking up. And then I started to get a few messages, maybe 5 or 6, from people who knew me well and trusted that they could approach me. And this is a big deal. I felt like this was the biggest gift as a podcaster. These people were mainly either in Israel or connected very closely to Israel, Jewish yoga teachers mainly, and they were messaging me trying to explain that what I was posting was now looking anti-Semitic. So I just was like, that's it, let's hop on phone calls, because I do not want to be showing up like that. So there were a few who I didn't get on phone calls with because they were threatening or name-calling. I'm not getting on a phone call then. So I talked with these people like human to human, and I got to hear their fear and their pain, and it was so good for me to really listen to understand why they were feeling the way that they were feeling, very vulnerable, very afraid, for all appropriate reasons. And even this group of people was saying to me, of course we want a ceasefire, and we want Palestinians to be free and safe. So I knew, okay, we are on the same page here. But there were also some things that were still feeling really triggering that I was saying to them. But at the same time, they were like, okay, we've cleared that up. We don't think it's that you're being anti-Semitic, but we have some questions about these details that you're talking about that feel uncomfortable. So I have to say that I learned so much from these conversations. mostly what I have in common with these people. It's way more than what I don't have in common. We connected on all kinds of things, and I'm really grateful that I took the time to do that, and I didn't share it anywhere like online. I was just talking to individuals. And when I walked away from some of these conversations that I had, I wanted to look into more things. Like one big thing was Zionism and how it's showing up right now and how it was founded. And trust me, like go do a little research if you have time for research on the history of Zionism. It's unbelievable. And look at the many types of Zionism. I'm really looking at Christian Zionism right now, and that's a whole other rabbit hole. You don't have to. I'm just saying, like, this is one thing I went and did. And you know what? None of this changed my stance on wanting a ceasefire. I still don't think there's any justification for war crimes. I still don't think children, especially, should suffer. So I was like, well, I'm staying here in what I was feeling at the beginning. Somewhere in there, I also went to therapy. I'm so thankful for my amazing therapist. So she asked me to look at a couple of things, which I want to share here. Well, she asked me to notice a lot of things because that's what she does, like our whole therapy session, because she's amazing and it's uncomfortable. But the two things that really stuck with me that she asked me to look at was me looking if there were times in my life where I was in danger or felt like I was in danger and no one was showing up for me. And she asked me to look at Israel as a dysfunctional parent. And the children of that parent are relying on them for their safety and security because they have to. And they also see that their parent isn't perfect. So I want to clarify, when I say Israel here, I'm talking more about the Israeli government because no collective of people fully agree on anything. And before October the 7th, we all know that many people were in the streets of Israel because they were feeling like the government was not in line with their values. So these two things made me do a lot of compassion work while I looked at why people would ever try to justify the decisions made by the many leaders, not just Israeli leaders, that have resulted in the injuries, deaths, and displacement of millions of people as we all watch. And as someone who has studied trauma, that piece of things is keeping me awake at night, thinking of the generational trauma that so many are going to face. And when I held all of this compassion for my Jewish friends who were feeling very isolated in their pain, and still are, and very afraid of the rise in anti-Semitism, I came to this place where I was just feeling like physically ill, thinking that the Israeli government was using their fear and pain to harm others and potentially, I think, putting them in more danger down the road. I also had way more compassion when I reminded myself that Israel is like a secure parent for these people. And this group of people was traumatized beyond my comprehension throughout history. So it's super complex, for sure. And we as humans are like super complex beings. And all of that can get factored in. And then we have, I turn to yoga and therapy and listening to understand and being in connection and having conversations and a supportive community as well. Oh, also getting out in nature, as many of you know, which I haven't been doing enough in the last couple of days. And I have 2 podcasts that I've recorded that are about getting out in nature, and they'll come out in the new year if I don't get canceled before then. Sorry. So I guess I want to say that I looked at all of these things and felt like, okay, we have so many tools as yoga teachers. We could be doing so much right now. So I want to check in with you. What feels like an action that you can take right now that embodies the teachings of yoga in this moment? When you look back in this moment, when history is written, would you want to be known as someone who spoke up against harm, or as someone who sat by in silence, or someone who justified it? What do you think that we can do collectively to speak up and demand a ceasefire, knowing that to some people that does feel harmful? Those words feel hurtful to some people. So how can we, get the information that we need to get out there to say, no, we also stand with you and against anti-Semitism, for sure. So I know that I feel it like in my heart and my gut that I am against war and harm. You can throw all the things at me that you want, all the arguments. That's what I'm against. And if I get canceled by the yoga community for these views, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be part of a community that is going to either sit on the sidelines and watch this happen or justify why this should happen. Now, if you are finding this helpful, please share it with a yoga teacher or a studio or the leaders of your yoga teacher training, especially if they're saying nothing right now. Share it with Yoga Alliance, share it with IAYT. And I also wanted to say, just thank you so much. I know you care deeply. I know we've been here together for a long time on the podcast. If you've been listening to me for any length of time, we're coming up to 7 years on the podcast. And we've covered some really tough topics. And I even wondered if I was going to talk about this. And I was thinking, who would I bring on to talk about it? And here we are. It's me talking about it. And if I've made some mistakes in the words that I've said, if they feel hurtful, I want to hear from you. As long as you're not calling me names or threatening me in any way, leave that out and tell me, how can I do better? So we can do this, and it's going to be faster together. I had a yoga teacher tell me today, I don't know how I can market my things because it's going to look like I'm not listening to what's happening. Yeah, and it might. That's a really good thought right there. But if we do this together, it will be faster. Lives will be saved, and we'll be able to get on with helping people with yoga. So first, let's call for a ceasefire together, collectively. You can do that quietly, signing a petition or to your MP or showing up for a march. There are tons of ways to do this. And I know that Ray, who's here, has a link, and I'll include it in the show notes, maybe a couple of links. And if you have links of here are action items, and if you have ideas, let's do that. Let's make it all collectively happen. So first is the ceasefire, and then collectively, let's call for freedom and equality for all people until that's everywhere. Maybe by the time you listen to this episode, this isn't relevant for the people in Palestine. Do not tell me there isn't a Palestine. Don't even. I had someone tell me that this week, and there are Palestinian people, and there is a Palestine. Okay. Let me know if that's upset you. Okay. I also want to tell you of the things that I am doing if you want to get together in person online. We have a yoga offering that Tyla is sharing with us. It's yoga during a pelvic cancer diagnosis. And I'm really excited about this. It starts on January the 10th, goes until February the 14th. I'll put all of the details in the show notes, or you can head on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com to find out how you can join a 6-week yoga series specifically for people who have pelvic cancer, or if you're supporting that person. I want to thank our entire team over here. Suzanne is our audio engineer, and this episode is going to give her a lot of work because I've been chatting with all of you on Instagram. Crunch, who's our traveling writer, who always is speaking up. Go follow Crunch on Instagram for sure. Crunch is also looking at leading travel trips for people in a really beautiful way. And Sinead, who, oh my gosh, let's all send a huge hug to Sinead because she keeps a lot of things organized over here. And also thank you to you, dear listener, for doing the work that you're doing, for listening all the way to the end when this is a tough episode. These are tough questions that we have of how can we hold space for our students? How can we hold space for ourselves? How can we lean on each other when it feels scary to speak up? How can we do that? I want to keep hearing from you. So send me a message on Instagram, or you can always send me a message through my email. You can find that on our website, and you can also leave me a voice note from our website as well. So I want to leave you with a question that I always end the podcast with. What will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community? By community, I mean global community, so that you can share the yoga that lights you up.